the landscape of warfare has changed dramatically in Ukraine. Picture this: swarms of drones decimate Russian armored vehicles, forcing their army to scale down to smaller units. But it doesn't stop there. Covert operatives from Ukraine's intelligence have infiltrated behind enemy lines, sabotaging Russian facilities and eliminating troops. Yet, none of this could compare to what unfolded recently. On September 9, a startling revelation emerged from Euromaidan press. They reported that Ukraine had spotted a significant buildup of Russian forces in the Donetsk region, particularly around Dobropillia, a key target for Russia, with dreams of linking to the strategic city of Pokrovsk. Typically, such reconnaissance would involve traditional scouting groups or drones watching over enemy movements. But Ukraine had a secret weapon: its burgeoning cyber army. Known as the IT Army of Ukraine, this group of skilled hackers has turned the tide by launching a new mission: hacking Russia's security cameras. These weren't your run-of-the-mill cameras, they were high-tech devices intended to surveil Russian bases on captured Ukrainian land. With a few keystrokes, Ukraine gained eyes into the heart of Russian operations. What did they uncover? Troops preparing for a significant assault on Dobropillia, assembling in convoys ready for a decisive strike that Russian leaders hoped would be their final push. In an unexpected twist, Ukraine was able to outmaneuver its adversary. With precise intelligence from the hacked cameras, Ukraine unleashed a barrage of drones and missiles on positions Russia believed to be secure, thwarting any potential advance before it could even begin. As the IT army pieced together this intelligence, they identified not just isolated units but a formidable coalition of the Russian 155th and 40th Naval Brigades, alongside airborne forces from the 11th Brigade. Each of these units had entered the battle from previously hard-fought landscapes like Bakhmut, Kursk, and Kherson. These were not fresh recruits, these were battle-hardened troops, but even they bore the scars of prior engagements. Yet, the critical revelation was that this assembled force lacked the necessary armor and artillery for a successful offensive. As Ukraine examined the data from the hacked cameras, it became evident that Russia's preparations were woefully inadequate. To clarify, they aimed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenders, but the truth was far from it. With dwindling resources, Russia's ambitions were simply outpacing their readiness. With over 11,000 tanks already lost to Ukraine's well-coordinated assault, Russia had resorted to marshalling outdated Soviet-era tanks from dusty storage. Reports indicated real concerns about the numbers: approximately 2,000 usable tanks remaining, coupled with a meager production rate of new vehicles. This was not just an invasion, it was a forced march towards a cliff. The deceptive calmness of the Russian front masked a critical deficiency: an army struggling to maintain its offensive rhythm. The moment they planned the attack on Dobropillia, they gravely miscalculated their capabilities. How did Ukraine exploit this weakness? As they monitored troop movements via the hacked surveillance, they recognized the perfect opportunity to ambush. The result? An astonishing turn of events that could reshape the battlefield. But could Ukraine capitalize on this discovery before the tide turned again? The story continues, and each moment carries critical weight in this ongoing battle for freedom. In September, the IT Army of Ukraine embarked on a groundbreaking mission, hacking into Russia's security cameras. These weren't your typical cameras, they were strategically placed to monitor the military bases that Russia had occupied in the Donetsk region. This innovative approach opened the door for Ukraine to leverage its enemy's surveillance against them. What unfolded was a revelation. The hackers discovered a buildup of Russian troops preparing for a renewed offensive on the strategically vital town of Dobropillia. Meanwhile, Russia was orchestrating extensive convoys, intending to send reinforcements and equipment. Putin envisioned this as his final attempt to seize the town. Little did he know, Ukraine was already one step ahead. With vital intel gleaned from the hacked cameras, Ukrainian forces pinpointed the location and movements of the Russian military. Armed with this knowledge, Ukraine unleashed a devastating barrage of drones and missiles targeting bases that the Russians thought were out of danger. According to reports from Euromaidan press, the effects were staggering. Ukraine had tapped into a significant force of Russian units, among them, the 155th and 40th Naval Brigades, alongside airborne forces from the 11th Brigade and remnants of the 76th Division. Their names may not mean much to those unfamiliar with the conflict, but the context reveals their significance. These were troops drawn from previous battlefronts such as Bakhmut, Kursk, and Kherson, areas where they had gained infamous reputations on the battlefield. Putin relied heavily on these seasoned fighters, particularly the 155th Brigade, known for its high-risk missions. However, as the IT Army's intel showcased through the hacked footage, these veterans were about to face an ambush unlike any other, one that would shatter Russia's ambitions once more. The stakes were higher than ever, but could these battle-hardened soldiers rise to the occasion, or were they destined to become yet another statistic in Putin's miscalculated strategy? Tension hung in the air, hearts raced, and the future of Dobropillia teetered on a knife's edge. A crucial confrontation was on the horizon, its outcome uncertain and electrifying. Previously, we saw that the soldiers caught by Russia's own cameras were battle-hardened veterans from elite brigades Putin depended on for the toughest strikes. But even these hardened troops could not change the grim reality facing Russia's army. What if the great assault ordered by Putin was never meant to conquer Dobropillia? Instead, it was a desperate gamble, sacrificing battered troops from stalled fronts to try and patch a collapsing line. Reports show that Russian forces, already bleeding elsewhere, were funneled to Dobropillia in a last-ditch effort to salvage a losing fight. But this was more than a battle, it was a cruel calculation. Ukraine's hackers, infiltrating Russia's security cameras, unearthed what Russia desperately tried to hide. The amassed troops were nowhere close to being ready for a real attack. A convoy was forming, yes, but it was stripped of the armor and artillery necessary for any serious advance. The visual evidence revealed empty tanks, broken equipment, and vehicles crawling behind in disrepair. Putin wasn't safeguarding his soldiers. He was sending them as human shields, hoping Ukraine's defenders would waste valuable firepower on poorly equipped cannon fodder. The image captured by those hacked cameras felt like a death sentence before a gun was even fired. This state of desperation should shock no one who has tracked Ukraine's relentless dismantling of Russia's mechanized forces. Tanks crushed by missiles. Armored vehicles smoldering under drone strikes. Artillery silenced by relentless bombardments. The brutal math is unforgiving. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost over 11,000 tanks, more than 23,000 armored cars, and more than 32,000 artillery pieces. When you hear about these numbers, the true scale of devastation hits you. It's a war of attrition where Russia's military strength is draining fast, much faster than many expected. The lack of essential weaponry isn't just bad luck, it paints a dark picture of a military on the verge of collapse. But why did this once mighty force come to this dismal state? What failures led to such crippling shortages? And if Russia is running low on tanks and artillery, what does its future hold on the battlefield? The answer starts with Russia's growing inability to replace its losses. Instead of modern, battle-ready equipment, they're forced to drag out rusty relics from the past. Their stockpiles are aging, decaying, barely functional. Meanwhile, Ukraine's forces watch Russia's slow unraveling through eyes that neither side expected, the hacked cameras that turned the enemy's gaze into Ukraine's most deadly weapon. And yet, the most dangerous moments are still ahead. As these battered troops struggle to even reach Dobropillia's defenses, the question lingers, can they mount any meaningful strike at all? Or is this doomed force destined to fall apart before a single shot is fired? The next move will decide not only Dobropillia's fate but perhaps the very survival of Russia's armored power. What will happen when the fragile illusion of strength shatters completely? The battlefield is waiting, with secrets still hidden in the metal and dust of those broken machines, ready to reveal a truth that could change everything. As tension escalates in the tumultuous theater of war, Russia appears to be facing an insurmountable challenge. Amidst fierce conflict, Ukraine's intelligence and military strategies have turned the tide. With astonishing precision, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance disclosed that, as of September 10, Russia had suffered catastrophic losses: 11,172 tanks, 23,622 armored vehicles, and 32,606 artillery systems, all casualties of relentless Ukrainian strikes, especially from aerial drones. Can you imagine the chaos within the Russian ranks, their once imposing military now stretched thin? The staggering data reflects a dire shortfall in Russia's heavy armor. The dwindling tank supply leaves them vulnerable, revealing a narrative akin to a tale of two hourglasses. As one sand timer depletes, the other still holds momentum. But as the days pass, Russia's hourglass runs out of sand more quickly than Ukraine's. Despite Vladimir Putin's belief in the supremacy of his military, evidence showcases a grim reality. The battlefield is littered with outdated Soviet-era tanks, hastily pulled from the depths of storage. However, many of these ancient machines are barely functional, hastily cobbled together from cannibalized parts. Can you hear the creaking of rusted metal under pressure? We find ourselves witnessing a remarkable transformation in the balance of power. Once a heavy-handed aggressor, Russia's tank presence in Ukraine has been on a notable decline. Analysis from the National Security Journal reveals the sobering truth: Russia has around 2,000 tanks ready for deployment and approximately 3,000 armored personnel carriers. It's a staggering understatement of strength for a military once perceived as a formidable force. As Ukrainian forces mount their defenses, Russia's thinning resources turn their strategic ambitions into mere ambitions. The looming question remains: how long can this depletion continue before Russia is left defenseless? As we dig deeper, we uncover more unsettling truths behind Russia's struggle, a reality that serves as both a warning and a promise of future developments. What fresh surprises await as this conflict unfolds? Stay tuned as we delve further into the details that could change everything. What happens when a formidable army relies on outdated technology? Picture this: a massive maneuver, soldiers brimming with bravado, yet equipped with weapons that belong in a museum. This is the reality for the Russian military as it scrambles to sustain its operations against Ukraine, a situation set to reach a breaking point by 2026. With depleting reserves of around just 2,000 tanks, alongside a similar count of infantry fighting vehicles and about 3,000 armored personnel carriers, the fate of Russia's military arsenal hangs in the balance. For months now, reports have detailed how Russia's armored forces have dwindled. As Ukrainian defenses have proven effective, Russia has not only faced losses but is forced to deploy relics of war long past their prime. The cracks in Russia's military capabilities are now gaping. With only 300 to 400 new BTR-82 armored personnel carriers manufactured annually, much of their fleet is cobbled together from old stock, which often means rusted, ineffective vehicles. Despite this, Russia continues to manufacture tanks at a meager rate of around 300 per year, predominantly the troubled T-90M model. These tanks, plagued by notorious production flaws, struggle to withstand enemy fire. Incidents like the disco head glitch, or a tank turret spins uncontrollably upon impact, symbolize a military in disarray. As Ukraine enhances its military strategy, hacked security cameras reveal an unsettling truth about the amassed Russian forces near the town of Dobropillia. The cameras, turned into vital intelligence tools, expose not just a gathering of soldiers, but their glaring lack of defensive artillery. This vulnerability presents an opportunity that Ukraine is poised to exploit. But amid all this chaos, can Ukraine deliver a decisive blow? Will it seize the chance to ambush this ill-equipped Russian force? The stakes have never been higher as both sides brace for an unprecedented clash. Stay tuned to witness the unfolding battle, where every move could tip the scales of this prolonged conflict. Previously, we learned that Ukraine uncovered serious weaknesses in the artillery support of Russian forces massing near Dobropillia. This lack of firepower was no accident. Now, let's dive deeper into just how deep Russia's artillery crisis runs and why it might be courting disaster by sending worn-out relics into battle. Imagine soldiers preparing for a major offensive, yet their firepower comes from weapons outdated before many of us were born. That's the stark reality Ukraine's intelligence revealed. Russia, desperate to fill the artillery gap, is dusting off Soviet-era relics, including the infamous D-74 cannon and artillery piece crafted in the 1950s, discarded by Moscow decades ago. Picture metal groaning under stress, ancient barrels belching smoke older than the soldiers themselves. This is not modern war, it's a ghost of battles past. Military analyst Hamish de Breton-Gordon exposed this eerie truth. According to him, Ukraine discovered fragments of destroyed D-74 units on the battlefield. Why use such outdated weapons? It's not just nostalgia, but raw necessity. Russia is reportedly running out of modern 152mm artillery shells. The solution? Supply lines now dependent on North Korea, funneling primitive 122mm shells that fit these ancient cannons. A chilling image emerges, decades-old guns roaring once more, propped up by a shaky network of allies, as Moscow scrambles to keep its artillery operative. Does this mean Russia is gambling its assault on Dobropillia with troops hammered by second-hand, barely functional firepower? Quite possibly. Ukraine's spies, watching through hacked security cameras, saw a force poorly equipped but still slated to launch an attack. Was this desperate hodgepodge of units meant to take and hold terrain? More likely, they were cannon fodder sent to bleed in defense of a losing cause. At this moment, Ukraine faced a critical question. Should they strike immediately while these ill-prepared troops were vulnerable and gathered, or wait until they reached Dobropillia's gates? The choice would define the next chapter of this brutal war. What would Ukraine decide? And how far down this road of desperation would Russia go before it breaks? The static crackle of compromised security cameras fed real-time intelligence to Ukraine's cyber warriors. Every movement, every moment of unpreparedness, was a thread Ukraine could pull to unravel Russia's plans. The stage was set not just for an ambush, but for a decisive blow against a force already stretched thin under the weight of obsolete weaponry. Stay tuned to uncover how this digital eyes-in-the-sky strategy tipped the scales, and exposed the unraveling of a military machine that thought it could outlast its opponent with sheer numbers alone. Would Russia's artillery ghosts become the harbingers of its defeat? The answer lies just ahead. In the previous part, we saw how Russian forces, stripped of essential armor and artillery, prepared to launch a desperate assault on Dobropillia. Ukraine discovered this looming attack through hacked security cameras. Russia's own surveillance betrayed them. With the enemy's exposed weakness revealed, Ukraine faced a critical choice: strike immediately or wait for the battered forces to reach Dobropillia's front line? Ukraine chose to strike preemptively. This was no reckless gamble, it was a calculated move built on a web of cyber intelligence and real-time espionage. The IT army of Ukraine watched Russian convoys move, tracked their pathways, and mapped out staging grounds, all through Russian cameras spying on their own troops. No satellites. No drones risking exposure. Just Russia's own eyes feeding Ukraine the full picture. They knew exactly when and where Russian forces gathered. This meant Ukraine maintained absolute stealth. While Moscow believed its movements remained hidden, Ukraine was already preparing a crushing assault. The unsuspecting Russian soldiers were blind to the storm about to engulf them. Then came the strike. Ruthless. Relentless. And led by the weapon Ukraine has mastered: drones. Not ordinary drones, but loitering munitions like the Ram 2X miniature hunters equipped to ambush convoys on the move. These drones soar silently above the battlefield, circling as they lock onto targets. Then, with deathly precision, they dive headfirst into lightly armored vehicles and soft targets, detonating and silencing Russian troops before they even reach the front. Imagine the eerie silence broken by sudden explosions, metal shredding, men thrown into chaos, while Russian soldiers in occupied territory hardly grasped that they were under attack. 1 minute, they were moving toward battle; the next, their columns were shattered by swarms of lethal drones. But drones were only part of the assault. Ukraine supplemented their strikes with missiles, raining destruction on Russian staging areas. The shock was undeniable. Military bloggers and telegram channels inside Russia quickly revealed the disaster unfolding: armored vehicles destroyed, motor pools devastated, supply lines cut off, all thanks to the intelligence gleaned from Russia's own cameras. Ukraine didn't just defend Dobropillia, it turned the tables in a way nobody saw coming. The once confident Russian forces, marshaled as a cannon fodder assault, were instead pulverized before they could even take up their positions. Moscow had counted their losses: battered troops, minimal tanks, and artillery stretched too thin, but now, their vulnerable supply convoys paid the highest price. This cyber-enabled ambush exposed a terrifying truth: Russia's control over its own troops was crumbling. Their blind faith in sheer numbers failed spectacularly when those numbers were tracked and attacked by unseen eyes. Could this shift mark the beginning of the end for Russia's advance? Or is there an even darker secret waiting to be revealed behind the shattered remnants of the Dobropillia force? Imagine this: entire Russian convoys, armored trucks, and soldiers, all gathered far behind the front lines, supposedly safe, are suddenly exposed. The roads they trust become death traps, their reinforcements decimated before they can even move. This nightmare is exactly what Ukraine engineered by turning Russia's own surveillance network against it. In the previous chapter, we saw Ukraine's drones and missiles unexpectedly strike, disrupting Russian forces hidden deep within occupied lands. Now, the weapons of war have shifted from explosives to ones of a digital nature. Striking from the shadows, Ukraine's cyber fighters hacked into Russian security cameras that were meant to guard staging areas and convoy routes. Instead, these cameras became Ukraine's eyes, revealing every vulnerable armored vehicle and truck lined up for battle. Russian social media began showing damning footage uploaded by local users. Russian military vehicles hit hard, exploding on open roads far behind the supposed front. Such strikes shattered Russia's confidence in its own defenses. Roads that Putin thought were secure turned lethal. The reinforcements, plucked from key battlegrounds like Kursk and Kherson and funneled into Dobropillia, were falling apart before their mission even began. This revelation sends a chilling message. While Russia's forces seemed numerous on paper, in reality, their strength crumbled beneath Ukraine's relentless digital assault. It's as if Ukraine orchestrated a silent ambush without ever firing a shot on that ground. The force assembling for Russia's next big push was rushed, under-equipped, and doomed the moment it was spotted through those hacked feeds. Ironically, Ukraine learned this tactic from Russia itself. The hacking of enemy surveillance isn't a new idea. Russia has tried this digital warfare before, aiming at Ukrainian infrastructure and defenses. But now the tables have turned. Ukraine's hackers are becoming maestros of cyber warfare, exposing vulnerabilities today that Russia failed to guard. The question now is stark: if one breach of Russia's security cameras led to such devastation, what happens next? Will Ukraine's cyber army continue peeling back layers of Russia's war effort, or will Putin find a way to plug these digital holes? The front lines may be physical, but the battles of information and technology are just as brutal and far less visible. Listen closely: the hum of drones and the whistle of missiles may be fading for certain Russian units before they even reach the battlefield. How long can an army withstand when its own eyes betray it? The war's pace is shifting, and the shadows hold weapons deadlier than any gunfire. The next chapter is about uncovering the cracks in Russia's armored facade and the stunning consequences that follow. Imagine waking up to find your own security cameras spying on you, used not by thieves or stalkers, but by a relentless enemy lurking in the shadows. What if the very eyes intended to protect your homeland were hijacked to plot your downfall? This chilling reality struck Kyiv in January 2024. Russian hackers seized control of 2 residential cameras in the heart of Ukraine's capital. One, innocently perched on a balcony, faithfully watched the street and neighbors. Instead of secrecy, the hackers made a grave mistake: they streamed the live feed openly, revealing their presence and intentions. The other camera, tucked away in a parking lot, secretly fed vital details that fueled a powerful missile strike against Kyiv in early January. Can you imagine the cold fear of realizing your own defenses had been turned against you? In the months that followed, Russia doubled down on this eerie strategy. By May 2025, British intelligence unveiled a sweeping cyber assault targeting Ukraine's border cameras. These weren't random hacks, they were deliberate strikes to monitor how Western aid snuck into Ukraine's beleaguered territories. The notorious GRU Unit 26165, infamous for covert operations, pressed its digital fingers into key zones, border crossings, military outposts, even busy rail stations. It was a vast espionage web. 10,000 cameras fell under Russia's grip, primarily in Ukraine, but also across Eastern Europe, from Romania to Hungary and Slovakia. Russia's cyber spies meticulously tracked every movement, weaving data into their war machine. Yet, this sinister playbook was known to Ukraine. They had watched, learned, and when September arrived, struck back with a mastery of their own. Ukraine's cyber warriors launched a daring counterattack, this time stealing the gaze of Russia's own security cameras in occupied regions. What started as covert eyes became weapons of war, revealing troop buildups and shattered plans before they could unfold. Both sides danced this deadly game of digital espionage and deception, where cameras were more than watchers, they were battlefield sentinels. So, what happens when your enemy uses your own tech against you? How does one outsmart an opponent who hacks your eyes? And, as the war drags on, who will seize the advantage in this silent, invisible battlefield? The answer lies not just in tanks or drones, but in who best controls the eyes in the sky and the shadows on the ground. Earlier, we saw just how boldly Ukraine turned Russia's own security cameras into weapons of war, uncovering key troop buildups near Dobropillia. Now, the shockwaves of these discoveries keep rippling across the battlefield. Russia's second wave of forces destined for Dobropillia lies in ruins, crushed before the battle even began. But what does that mean for what's coming next? This disastrous setback is actually a double victory for Ukraine. First, it signals that the reinforcements Russia will send next are probably just as vulnerable as those already destroyed. If Ukraine can keep hacking into Russia's surveillance systems, the next wave of attackers won't see daylight without Ukraine knowing exactly where they are. Second, even if Russia manages to disguise its upcoming moves or closes off these camera feeds, Putin faces a brutal dilemma. He must drain troops in heavy armor from other fronts to keep pushing at Dobropillia. This bleed elsewhere could open new doors for Ukraine's counterattacks. Russia's recent failed push at Dobropillia marked their second major attempt to break through this strategic point, and once again, their effort collapsed long before gaining any ground. The first attempt, though temporarily successful, was also eventually undone. In August, Moscow had driven forces east and northeast of Dobropillia, seizing several villages. But Ukraine hit back fiercely, reclaiming key areas like Zapovin and Novshakov. These victories sealed off Russia's hopes of turning Dobropillia into a launching pad for capturing the vital fortress city of Pokrovsk. Russia had pinned its hopes on the September reinforcements to undo Ukraine's hard-won gains. Yet, Ukraine's mix of hacked cameras, relentless missile strikes, and swarms of drones shattered those plans like glass. But Dobropillia's fate is far from decided. On the contrary, experts warn its defense could influence the entire region's balance of power. On September 5, Serhiy Zdurets, CEO of Defense Express, stressed that holding Dobropillia might determine Ukraine's ability to safeguard Pokrovsk. He pointed out something chilling: Russian counteroffensives from the east are pulling vast enemy forces deep into battles that Ukraine's defenders desperately need to win. Yet, with each failed Russian attempt, that force sags under mounting losses, and the question looms larger than ever: can Putin's army sustain such a draining fight? Can Russia really afford to bleed out its forces here? And what secret vulnerabilities might Ukraine uncover next, now that the enemy's own eyes have been turned against them? The quiet hum of hacked security cameras is not just surveillance anymore, it's a relentless drumbeat echoing the fall of Russia's military machine near Dobropillia. The battle intensifies. The stakes skyrocket. And the next move could change everything. In the relentless battle for Dobropillia, Ukraine stands at a critical juncture. The CEO of Defense Express, Serhiy Zdurets, highlights the significance of this front. What happens here may very well determine the fate of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian forces are engaged in fierce counterattacks from the east, effectively tying down significant Russian troops. The struggle for control has been arduous, with Russia holding a numerical advantage, providing them with hopeful momentum. Yet, Ukraine has defended Dobropillia with exceptional resilience and clever tactics, harnessing the power of its hacker collective. As they anticipate Putin's next move, preparations are underway to transform the areas surrounding Pokrovsk into a perilous trap for Russian soldiers. Imagine a landscape where secrets and technology collide. Ukraine's hackers have turned the tables, using Russian security cameras against their creators. What might happen when cyber warfare shifts the balance of power on the battlefield? The tension escalates as both sides strategize who will seize the advantage this time. With the echoes of artillery in the distance and the crackle of drones overhead, the stakes couldn't be higher. As the countdown begins, and both sides prepare for the next wave of attacks, the question looms: will Ukraine succeed in safeguarding Dobropillia once again? Get ready for an epic showdown as a new chapter unfolds in this gripping conflict.